Hello, worthless humans. This is Skeletor. You are listening to This Week in Geek with Mike the Birdman Dodd on ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'll get you, Birdman.
Get ready for the armor-plated apocalypse. 2 legendary metallic super titans. 2 densely rendered graphic universes. Legions of classic uber villains. It all adds up to one monster crisis. Fly, blast, and destroy through 360 degrees of supercharged 3-dimensional hand-to-hand heavy metal headbanging. Iron Man Exo Manowar in heavy metal. Brought to you by Marvel Comics and Acclaim.
I knew I should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque.
Dr. Banner, belted by gamma rays.
Brainiac, what is it? Look, I just want some pants. A decent pair of pants.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
It's morphin' time!
Put an ad on the front page. Cash money for a picture of Spider-Man. He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said,
"It's clobbering time."
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to TWIG Sunday Funnies. Yes, it is yet another podcast brought to you by ThisWeekInGeek.net. I am one of your many inked colored hosts that you can call. I am Mike the Birdman Dodd, but I'm not alone as I trek through a different type of universe. That's right, it's not Marvel, it's not DC, it's not even Image Comics. No, we are taking a walk on the more Valiant side of the page. We are taking a look at the Valiant universe, but I'm not alone as I take on strange, exotic pieces of armor or search for the boon. I am joined with my co-host in the city of Kitchener.
Hello, Alex, the producer. And we have an order. We actually have an order we're being introduced in.
That's right. And we are also finally joined who will be taking his rightful place at the throne of this podcast next time, JT. And I don't even have to introduce you from where he's from because it's part of his name.
From Saskatoon. Hey, folks. Also, with Mike telling me that I'm going to be taking the reins, if I might be allowed a small evil chuckle.
Good time. So yes, guys, we are here to once again talk about comic books, all things that are inked on the page, be they digital or elsewhere. But as we talked about last month, we talked about our favorite crossover comics of all time. We wanted to do something a little bit different, and Alex has been talking to us about this idea for quite some time, basically since the idea or the genesis for TWIG Sunday Funnies came up, and we wanted to talk about the Valiant universe of comic books. This is a comic book company that's been around for quite some time. Alex knows the history of it, so I'll throw to him in just a minute. I am not very familiar with it, so I guess before we go any further, Alex, this is more your background because you seem to be really passionate about these guys.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, in that they were one of the first comic companies I purchased comics for back in the mid-'90s. I would go to the comic shop, and they sometimes have them, 10-cent bins. And I remember picking up the Exo Manowar because of seeing magazine articles for the Manowar Iron Man crossover. Was it on the Saturn or something?
Saturn, the Sega Genesis, and Super Nintendo, I think, had it as well, but it wasn't as good looking. And I think the 32X had it too.
And as a kid, I was like, oh, it's Conan with a spacesuit. Like, I thought that was kind of cool. Now, of course, it's Visigoth versus... I guess what was it, Crimerian in the Conan, but it was a similar, it was a similar idea, and I was like, that was cool. And from there, I had picked up as a kid, I think the Turok comics and a few others when they were under their, I guess their growing pains years. Yeah,
they had the license basically, which I thought in the 90s Valiant, they had Dr. Solar, Man of the Atom, and I thought that was an original property of theirs, and that's apparently a character from like the mid-60s that no one was doing anything with.
Yeah.
Like, this looks cool.
Yeah, they did that a few times, and I think it was Dynamite picked up those licenses later on too, but just to get sort of into the origin, they're a company that had a meteoric rise. then were bought out by a larger company that made terrible video games and basically destroyed their the quality of their properties, and then they disappeared and had a comeback about what is it? I think
2010-ish.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, they officially announced their comeback with the big launch happening about 8 years ago. And they've had they've had a second relaunch as of the last couple of years because of a big deal they made with Sony. But the background, like they have on their website sort of the history of them. If you were a 90s kid that was a big comic book fan, you knew who they were because at one point they were outselling Marvel and DC.
Which is
insane.
Yeah.
and when I say we say outselling them, we're not talking outselling them now where like selling 10,000 copies is a big deal. They were selling million sellers.
Yeah. Big M. And also one of the coolest things about the original incarnation of Valiant that I loved is the Sasquatch formerly of Marvel Comics, Jim Shooter, because the guy is like 6 foot something. Like he's literally the biggest man in the room. Apparently he started writing comics when he was like 15 years old, and he was writing Legion of Superheroes when he was a kid. He tried to buy Marvel, and that didn't work out, and then he got ousted from Marvel, and then he got together with some other investor, and that's how Valiant happened. If I
recall, this right. Was because remember there was the dark times for Marvel where they were on the brink of bankruptcy back in the day.
Where Canon Films almost made a Spider-Man movie in the 80s.
Yeah. That's. But remember, like when they were licensing out their properties to like Roger Corman, thinking that would make them money. So, around it says here 1989, as you said, they formed the group Valiant. Interestingly enough, they slowly released title after title, as you do, and they were one of the first companies that had a not only like critically acclaimed stuff, they were sort of proclaimed as, what the 90s of comics will be. It was, edgy without being like over the top. But then they had like psychological comic books like Harbinger comes to mind there. And then they sort of, as we said, they were picked up by, was it Acclaim Entertainment, I think?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and then they're like, hey, we now have a means to publish our own comics based on our video games, which the Turok one was pretty good. But then, it never bodes well when a company that's known for making mediocre video games, with the exception of Turok.
I was going to say, hey, you don't talk shit about my Turok, sir.
Which is why, I guess it's no surprise that the best comic book produced during that time period was based on the best game that they had. It's the one they probably actually put money into.
Yeah.
Whereas, and then, we have the sort of, is it like a crash that happened in the late 90s where I guess
bubble burst, basically.
Yeah. And people were like, oh, these aren't going to be as collectible as we thought, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they fell victim to that. And because they weren't their own entity, they had to sort of be broken up when Acclaim fell apart.
Yeah. No, because I'm just looking at the wiki for some of the history of Valiant Comics, and Magnus Robot Fighter, Solar Man of the Atom, and Turok Dinosaur Hunter were all originally titles published by I don't know if you guys are familiar with the old school Gold Key comics.
Yeah, I have a bunch of Gold Key Star Trek comics.
Yeah. And I didn't know that because I remember my first introduction to Valiant was those 2 or 3 pages you'd have in a comic book of like Mile High Comics, or the one where they'd advertise, you can buy like, it's like those old, sell greeting cards, and you get those prize pages you'd have in the back of a comic book. And there's always these Valiant comics, and you'd see like this weird dude covered in this curvy, almost organic looking metal. Like, I didn't like the original design of XO. It just, as a kid, I didn't like it.
Yeah, it also suffered from early 90s proportions where it's like, why is the upper body twice the size of the lower body? Skip leg dig, bro.
but not to Captain America Heroes Reborn levels, where he's got
just
man titties.
Just your standard 90s, my muscles are like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but my lower legs are like a kid.
Spindly.
Yeah.
It's weird. I remember seeing Exo Manowar I remember seeing Magnus Robot Fighter at my local comic book store, which was in Owen Sound, which was Mike's bookstore. The thing I remember most about Valiant Comics is their pages felt different. Their paper stock looked and felt different. It wasn't the super high gloss of the Marvel and DC comics at the time, and it wasn't as shiny as the Image comics as well. They had a more pulpy feel, and that was almost appealing to me, but I didn't know who these characters were. I knew about the video games because of like Game Pro.
Game Pro and EGM used to have a lot of them.
I remember they ran ads for Exo, Manowar, and Iron Man like every month for like a year. Oh, yeah. And it never got my attention. Although I would always remember these characters' names, but I never knew anything outside of the Turok video game. And Shadow Man was also a video game for the N64.
Yeah, that one. I remember the only, I guess what you call like mainline series that I had, other than some Exo Manowar stuff, which Exo was being marketed as like their breakout star. It was in popularity, at least in pop culture. Whereas Harbinger and a couple others were more considered like the better written ones. But the detail for a 90s comic, like they were more detailed. They had more mature themes than you would get in a lot of Marvel DC mainline stuff. And when they relaunched, I believe it was Harbinger ended up being their bigger seller in the 2012 line.
Is Harbinger, that's the guy who runs the Harbinger
Powers
Foundation. Oh yeah, that dude's like their evil bad. He's like the evil bad guy, more or less. He wants to take over the world.
And it's a bunch of kids that get psychic powers and try to stop them.
Okay,
It's like
with
everyone's Professor X, but they have every flavor of the psychic power rainbow.
That's what I thought, because like one of the things that we read in prep for this is we got the Valiant Universe zeros and issue ones for a lot of these series, and
specifically the relaunch that happened when they started up again, which was people laughed at them saying that, oh yeah, you're starting up the comic company again. Yeah, it's not like, where's it going to go? And they ended up winning a bunch of awards the year they came out for best writing, for best relaunch. Like they came back as if they had never left.
Yeah, like I was really impressed kind of reading through this. Like the one that got my attention was the Harbinger one for sure, which is that guy Toyo Harada, the guy who's like the super psychic. He's like a super psychic Reed Richards Dr. Doom mixed with Professor X, in that he can explode you anywhere on Earth and he's super rich and no one can stop him except the Renegades and Exo Manowar, and he's stolen Exo Manowar's armor before. So he's basically unto a god, but he came from a really shitty background, which I really liked. He grew up in the shadow of the Second World War and was like stealing food, looking for his mom and dad.
Yep.
And then he killed everybody.
See, you notice something that's there that you don't get in a lot of Marvel and DC? Relatable bad guys.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, outside of Magneto.
Outside of Magneto, okay. Let's count X-Men in a different category, because that was clearly the one franchise where they're like, let's give everybody a realistic background.
Yeah. Whereas you're not going to relate to Fin Fang Foom or maybe Annihilus, but that's whatever.
Well, I mean, the whole thing with Harada is, and I was thinking about this reading the material Alex provided, is Harada is essentially what they tried to do with Professor X in the Onslaught saga. He is Professor Xavier's powers with Magneto's will.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy too. And he's a cool bad guy. I mean, like during his little issue 0, he's guiding a kid who's essentially a super weapon, who is completely brainwashed. He's walking through like the Syrian embassy, and this kid has the power to make you relive your most traumatic moment and act on it. So there's people blowing their brains out, crying. He drags the Syrian president into like town square, and the mob kills him. And then they have this other team at Qatar meeting with the Russians, and they're like, yeah, you're going to give us the oil reserves from both your countries, and you don't have a like say in it, and you're going to do it. And I'm like, that's a master stroke. That is fucking awesome.
Oh yeah, like it's, and you can see why that was when it came back. That was the focal point. They, as much as Exo Manowar was a big deal because that was, I guess, quote unquote, their mascot, at least in the public eye at large. You can see Harbinger was where they were going to get all the praise initially when they
it builds the backbone.
I always thought Bloodshot was their big Valiant mascot because he is 90s, a big chiseled dude with a big circle on his chest who looks like the Terminator. And then obviously there was the big movie from this past year, which
he's the most marketable in like, how can you, the reason they made the movie of him first is it was Vin Diesel was interested, but also they're like, what can we market that doesn't need, like, yes, that had to have a budget to it, but what can we market that doesn't have to have a ton of backstory or explanation done? What is the easiest to make? And they're like, okay, it's quite literally the like the recent Terminators mixed with their version of the Punisher.
Yeah,
I can't tell you how boiling rage welled up in me watching the Bloodshot movie because I love the current Bloodshot comic, and it's almost as if for the sheer psychic rage that this piece of tape affixed itself to the center of my glasses, and my voice went up a pitch, and I felt like using the words actually a lot watching this movie. Like,
here's the thing though, it feels like a 90s movie. It
feels like it should have came out just after Spawn and after Batman and Robin, but before Daredevil 2003.
That's perfect.
On its own, I'm like, you know what? I was laughing watching it. I'm like, it's a stupid movie, but it was the logic in it. It was like, he's a normal human at the beginning, but he's smashing people's heads through like sinks and like shattering walls. And then it has like a very Reservoir Dogs torture scene moment at the beginning of the movie. And then he gets his superpowers and he becomes the Punisher, and the Punisher who's pale, basically.
Yeah. Although he doesn't spend very much time in his signature look, like less than a minute.
Oh, and that budget. That is because they slashed the budget by like 50 million partway into production.
I mean, I do appreciate when there is that sequence in the tunnel that it's a flower truck so he can be white there. I'm like, okay, sure.
That was a horror movie, that scene.
Yeah, that scene absorbed a significant chunk of their budget, you could tell. Because that whole scene was shot using high-speed cameras so they could get that slow motion. And it looks really good. And then the final battle looks like crap.
Yeah, although I like parts of the final battle, which I don't know whether those dudes who fight him are in the comic book. You would know more so than me.
I don't know either because I only read bits and pieces here and there or seen some crossovers with Bloodshot. I just knew that the reason they picked it up is because Sony wanted a deal. They signed a deal with Valiant because they wanted their own universe because they were afraid that they were going to lose Spider-Man. That's literally the reason they did it. And they went, well, these comics are popular. Let's sign them up now.
See, here's the thing. I
believe it was $1 billion deal too.
See, here's the thing I don't get, because, like, for example, and we'll get back to the main topic at hand, I don't understand why Sony wouldn't throw money at Todd McFarlane. Like, dude, let's just do your fucking Spawn movie. Here you go. Spawn is still more recognizable than fucking Bloodshot.
I believe Warner has a deal with them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
because they
also,
own the cartoon
they've got
and everything.
A raging Marvel boner. Because,
yeah,
I mean, everyone that's trying to create some sort of franchise based on a comic property is just looking at Marvel and they're just like, yes.
And they see this and they go,
I want.
So they saw this and went, Valiant has the richest and best written universe crossovers outside of the big two. So they went, okay, can we get a property that is well respected and already ready to go if we want to shoot it?
Well, here's something that I noticed while I was doing some research for the show. Valiant, as you mentioned, does have a lot of really good characters with really interesting backstories. You could do a lot with this. There are two properties in particular that really caught my attention. I may actually start to pick these books up on the regular because that's how much they caught me. And I don't spend money on comics outside of Power Rangers and the odd Ghostbusters comic. It was Archer and Armstrong, which in short, the power of Archer is he's basically Taskmaster from Marvel. If he views you doing anything, like anything physical, he knows that skill. He knows how to pick a lock. He knows capoeira. He knows how to catch a knife, that sort of thing. Archer is basically, or not Archer, Armstrong is one of the brothers who was basically Gilgamesh. He's been granted immortality, but he's basically super strong, super tough, and almost impossible to kill because he got this ancient artifact called the Boon, made him virtually immortal anyway. And it's them fighting evil societies.
And over the years, over the like millennia, he's like, it's tortured him to the point where he had given up on life because he can't die, and he became basically a homeless bum drunk.
Yeah, he's like, yep.
Now, sorry, just let me ask you guys quick. If we were to cast this movie, do you guys have any problem getting like a circa 2002 Mick Foley to play Armstrong?
That's not bad.
You could get him now.
Yeah, I'm just saying back then when he was a little more spry. It's just the Archer and Armstrong comic from like the current gen. I love, that's my favorite. Okay, it's my number one favorite. Number two is a character we haven't even mentioned, and it's the only original generation Valiant comic I ever read, was Ninjak. He's a spy, but he's a ninja. How is that not a movie?
I think the name is supremely stupid, but I love the background. I also love at one point Harbinger, Harada had turned Ninjak against Exo Manowar, and then they're like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be such an asshole, and they turned against Harbinger. I thought that was actually kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, ninjas. How am I not going to love this character? It's actually one of the first times, because the artist that worked on most of the original run of Ninjak is a little man who was a former EIC of Marvel Comics, Mr. Quesada.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he of I hate the marriage, therefore Peter make deal with devil. Bastard. And we haven't really talked about Acclaim Comics. Like, this is where I did my first deep dive into the Valiant heroes, and I love like the Shadow Man. I never read any of the original Shadow Man, but the reboot Shadow Man in version 2, where he's a former hitman based out of New Orleans, and now he's like this. He works for like Baron Samedi and the various Voodoo Loa, and he's like an agent of balance. So he's kind of like Doctor Strange in a way, but he still shoots people. Or the reboot of Ninjak in this version, where he's this nerdy white kid in NYC, and he's playing basically a Super Nintendo game, and he beats the unbeatable level and is gifted with the powers to actually become Ninjak in like the real world. It's like this whole video game by way of Masters of the Universe kind of thing, because then all the villains from the game are released and he has to go and capture them again.
There was one thing that I read, and I love this. I think this would make a supremely awesome television show, and you could bring in characters that aren't ridiculous into this show if you wanted to expand the Valiant cinematic universe into television. Punk Mambo. And that is essentially a character who is a voodoo mambo, who is literally a 1980s era style punk, like from like King's Road. She went to this posh British school, but she's like, oi, fuck you. And met a guy named Joe Mayhem, and he fed on his wanga, which is, I guess, magic or something. And she learned everything she possibly could, and she ran away from him. And she lives out in the swamps of New Orleans, or Louisiana rather. And she's just an incredibly cool looking character. If you told me you could put, you could use her, Shadow Man, Armstrong, and Archer, and probably Ninjak on Amazon Prime. If you just created a show named Valiant and it was an anthology series, and each episode would be a different story in the respective universe.
Do like order, a total of 30 episodes and, split them into 5-episode arcs for different characters.
Mini series within a mini series. I mean, was thinking like Shadow Man like that. If you did like some like this the second version of Shadow Man, I think, would work really well in this anthology format. The current version of Shadow Man, where he's kind of the second version, but it's more written with a superhero bent.
And we should preface it by saying that there was the relaunch in like 2012, and then around 2018, 2019, when the deal happened. Relaunch. Yeah, so when Sony signed the deal for Bloodshot, and Valiant also signed a deal for, I think it's Paramount has the rights to Harbinger. They actually worked out a deal between Sony and Paramount that they're going to allow the characters to cross over and do like a larger thing, like because the deal for Harbinger had been in the works for a long time, so Sony couldn't snatch that up.
Yeah, and essentially, from what I read, sorry, you go, Alex.
Yeah, so the idea is, I think it's 1 or 2 sequels to Bloodshot were planned. I don't know what is in the air right now with that. Harbinger is being produced, and then there was going to be a second Harbinger film, and then there was going to be a final crossover with them and the characters that had been introduced in all the other films.
Yeah, and basically it's based on Harbinger Wars, which is the Infinity Gauntlet, for lack of a better analogy.
And that had a lot of buzz around it. When that came out, that sold quite well.
I remember hearing about that, and I didn't know what the hell that it was, but I remember a lot. I'd get press releases or I'd see talk on Twitter. I just remember Harbinger Wars, but I didn't know what the fuck it was.
Well, it's essentially the culmination of the original, like the Harbinger Renegades series that came with the reboot, where it's building towards the Renegades versus Harada's Harbinger Foundation, which is like, it's literally called the Harbinger Foundation, but it's like a front, and he's this huge philanthropist throughout the world, but he uses that to like find and activate different psiots, which is what the psychic superpowered people are called in the Valiant universe. And it's essentially like this one big fight they have with the Renegades, the Harbinger Foundation, this other group of like renegade psiots called Generation Zero, where imagine tweens with these superpowers, but even less morals. And because Harada has a deal with Project Rising Spirit, he's able to draft Bloodshot into this conflict as well.
I mean, it's surprisingly neat and just how deep this universe is, but everybody that I know sleeps on it, which is, I think, really, really unfortunate. And I just had this thought right now. I'm just going to spit it out and get it into the ether. One comic that was included. It's such a stupid concept, but this would be amazing on Adult Swim, because you see how well a show like Rick and Morty does.
I think I know where you're going with this, but go ahead.
So do I.
Quantum and Woody would be an amazing show.
That was what I was actually going to bring up. Like I thought, like this would be something you could do as a live action. Like I don't know how it would work as a movie. You could do it as a live action show in the vein of like a Deadpool, or something ridiculous. But you're right. Like this would do really well as an animated show, because it's the basic premise is 2 guys end up getting powers, and they have to cling their wrists together on these bracelets once a day, or they'll vaporize.
Yeah, it's like they got the mega bands from when Rick Jones and Captain Marvel were sharing a body. That could, like, literally, every so often they have to clang. Otherwise, I love how they draw in the comics how like they're literally was it called evaporating, but they look like their bodies look like Swiss cheese.
And not to mention, they also have a goat
who has superpowers, who could fly, has heat vision, and has the mind of a scientist, but it's a backed up copy.
But it's their It's because Woody is I forget what Quantum's real name is, because I haven't read that for a minute. But yeah, Eric. It's Eric's dad who adopted Woody, and he created the technology that when these guys fell back asswards into it, that's how they got their powers.
And you, Michael, their inspiration, did you know where it was from?
No, I did not.
The creators of the comic really liked the movie White Men Can't Jump, and they based the characters on Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes.
That's amazing.
Oh my God, really?
Yep, 100%. Their designs, the whole idea behind them, the pacing of the jokes and how they did it was because they really liked that movie.
That's amazing. And like,
Sorry, you go, Mike.
I was about to say, like I said, how are people sleeping on this? Like, we all know Marvel, we all know DC. Image has Spawn, Angela, or Witchblade.
It's comic nerds like it. And Valiant, when they came back, I don't know if they're doing it anymore, because I was following initially. They were putting out the best quality hardcover deluxe editions on the market at like half the price that Dark Horse and anybody else was doing. Like, you could get a year, like their yearly deluxe editions were all 12 issues plus the annual plus an extra crossover if there was something there, plus interviews, making of drawings, and they were charging on Amazon like $40 for like.
So I'm just looking at the comic app that I use to get stuff, and evidently Quantum and Woody has rebooted again, or at least
really
issues.
They're doing the Marvel restarted every so often.
Yeah, they're at issue 3. For example, Livewire has her own series, and she's one of the hardcore people, or one of the people who fought against Harbinger, that I know. Exo Manowar just started at number 0 again. Dr. Tomorrow, which is only at issue 2. Bloodshot has a new book out. There's a Bloodshot 0. And yeah, that's kind of cool. Like, and as you mentioned, you can buy these things classic at really, really good prices.
Yeah, if you want the originals, they were selling the omnibuses, which had every single issue they ever did for the original series, and they were like $80 for like 800 pages.
That's insane.
Hardbound, and to the point where they're not so big that you can't open and read it, but just approaching it. I still have some of the other deluxe of the newer editions, but they were putting them out at roughly half the price of, like, if you had a Marvel that had 800 pages, you're paying $180 or more.
At least.
Yeah. Now, something you spoke of is like how people are sleeping on this, Mike. I think it's one of those blessing curse things with Valiant, because these entrepreneurs, Dinesh Shamdasani, I hope I haven't insulted the man by mispronouncing his name, and the rest of them, they did it I think they did very word of mouth. Like, they get it out there, you get it through, like, comic book resources and Bleeding Cool. Like, they get the press out there, but they just let it kind of go grassroots and grow. And it's still very much almost an underground sort of thing, because once they got that buzz, then they started going hard. Like, the first 3 or 4 years, they had like just ongoings, and eventually they tapered that off, and now it's like limited run, or limited series, I should say, with the crossovers here and there. It's kind of like what they did when Army of Darkness comics were started published in the early aughts, and they did series of miniseries. It's one narrative all the way through, but they don't commit to an ongoing series, and then it peters out after 6 issues. And I think that's a strength of theirs, that you get these teams together, you get the writers, the artists, they crank out some really solid work, and then they go from there and say, okay, we got, Quantum Woody, they still got this good buzz. Okay, we're going to, down the road, we'll get the series going here again. And they play the long game much better than the big two, especially, like I said, with Marvel, restarting titles every couple of years to, get that all important first time reader. And one other one character, mentioned Ninjak. One that I would like to see, if we get its own series, either on a mini series on Amazon or whatever, the Eternal Warrior. I think Alex might be familiar with this, but are you familiar with that character?
I'm familiar. I am
tangentially a little bit, and the same goes for Time Walker. I remember liking that when I was reading it.
Yeah, it's because it's Ivar, Gilly, and Aram. Aram is Armstrong. Gilly, or Gilgamesh, he basically becomes the protector of the Geomancer, who's like the sorcerer supreme of Valiant Comics universe. He cannot die. He is the fist and the steel of the earth. And it's essentially, he's the Highlander, but he's the only immortal like that. It's not like there's dozens of these guys around the world. I've always loved immortal characters like that. And Ivar is literally he's Doctor Who without the TARDIS. He can walk through time. He is tied into the time flow, and he knows where, like, I guess, what do you call them? Like, not portals, but basically time slips open where he can walk from like 1993 Venice, California to Rome when it's burning, and then to the modern day for a cup of coffee. It's stuff like that.
Yeah, like, it's cool how they kept these characters, like how the three brothers are still alive and influencing events in the Valiant universe. Like, one thing that I think it's the Time... No, it's not Time War. It's the other guy. The guy who's brought back, Gilead. He becomes the Eternal Warrior, right?
Yeah.
I like how it jumps to the year 4000... and he's the Eternal Emperor, and he's a bad guy now, and nobody knows why.
Well, they I was going to say, they have like the 4001 series, where what they do is they go, okay, how do we get our characters into the future? Well, they pick the characters that either would still be living because they, have long lives or robots, or in the case of Bloodshot, it's his nanites that survive because they're robotic. Or you have some characters like Rai, I believe, is from the future.
Well, Rai is like the future. He's an extrapolation of Bloodshot in the future. I think Mike got something mixed up. Is Gilead does survive to the year 4001, but he's still doing, like, protecting the Geomasher. The Immortal King is this corruption of Bloodshot's nanites, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Where they've launched the entire country of Japan into space. And Father leads New Japan in this way.
That's more interesting than anything Marvel has ever done.
And it's very cyberpunky.
Oh, yeah.
So Mike, that might be a series or offshoot you might want to read.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that we did this topic, just because I haven't been exposed to new things like this in a really long time. And it's genuinely exciting to see something that it isn't Batman, it isn't Spider-Man.
And unlike a lot of the other creator titles that you might see on Image, and that these aren't hokey. And not that hokey's a bad thing, or like a lot of the other comics feel independent. Their comics don't feel like they're indie comics. They feel rich and with, a big backstory, even though some of them, they only date back to the 90s. But they sometimes feel like, oh, these must have been around for a lot longer because they're very well written, very well drawn, and have good stories.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest strengths, and that sounds weird saying that, but one of the best things about Valiant Comics right now is they have this incredibly well thought out framework with their writing. Like, it's like early day Marvel, like, the late 60s into the early 70s, where they really hung on their continuity, but they're not slaves to it. And Valiant just does this better than anything. And also, if you want, one thing I would suggest to you, Mike, that I didn't think I was going to like this series that Valiant put out, and I ended up loving it. It's one of my favorites, is a series, it's 3 different volumes called Divinity. And it's basically the Russian space program shot these 3 cosmonauts out into space, and they all become, like, I guess, like Adam Strange or Adam Warlock on crank.
Okay.
And one of them comes back, and he's like this black guy who was, raised in like communist Russia, and he believes in the ideals of communism. And when he comes back, he gets kind of disillusioned, but he has all these godlike powers, and he's just, he doesn't even try. He ends up with like a cult following him, and he's just trying to like live his life and make things better in the world. And then his girlfriend, who is one of the other cosmonauts, come back, and the third guy. And the last crossover they did, it's like a it's called the Stalinverse, where the third cosmonaut goes back in time and futzes with the time stream such that Russia takes over the world. So when you meet Bloodshot, he's got like, this Zangief looking beard and mohawk, and he's got like, you know, a red star with the hammer and sickle, and he's like a tool of the Russian people. And you almost, everyone talks like, when I read these comics, everyone has the voice of Zangief from the Street Fighter movie. You know, this is where we go in our glorious struggle against the allied nations. Like, and then
real over the top, stereotypical.
yeah. But I mean, it's the fact that it's like, who would have thought? You know, it's like the freedom fighters from DC Comics on a world where the Nazis won World War II. You know, what if Russia ran the world?
And they're really good in their volumes as well. Of they'll give pages to give backstory if you're missing things. So you don't have to ever be afraid of picking up one of their one-off miniseries and go, I don't know what's going on. They'll explain it. Yeah. And if there's pages in their hardcovers as well, if there's like, oh man, there's like 3 or 4 issues of different comics that you'd have to read to get this, they include them. They don't force you to go out and buy out other things. So you might get doubled up certain issues in different volumes, but it's because those issues might be pertinent to those other volumes. Like, they don't make you search out, like other comic companies will be like, this was the asterisk, this was explained in this issue. They'll just include the whole issue.
Yeah. And
so
just one thing quick, if I may, Alex. If you haven't watched it already, Mike, you need to go on YouTube and watch Ninjak versus the Valiant Universe.
Send me a link after the show, because I kind of want to check it out.
Yeah, it's Michael Rowe, Canadian actor, musician. He played Deadshot on the Arrow, like in the Arrowverse series of shows. He plays Ninjak. John Morrison from WWE plays the Eternal Warrior.
Well, that's cool.
The older brother from that sitcom Baby Daddy, like the tall, goofy hockey player, he plays Arik, Exo Man of War. And it's basically Ninjak is forced to steal something from MI6, and then all his superhero buddies, including Archer and Armstrong, come after him.
Oh, that's cool. David Frank is Bloodshot in it.
Oh, yeah. Tommy the Green Power Ranger is Bloodshot. And it's all produced by the guys that do Superhero Beatdown, like Bat in the Sun Productions.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And it's like, the costuming looks really good. It looks kind of cosplay-y.
It's a web series, obviously, but it's a
web series
done well.
But the best thing about it, the quality, overall quality, this is like something from like 90s syndicated sci-fi action series. Like, we're talking like solid Hercules Xena production values, and I don't mean that as a negative. I truly do love that style, and it works so well with this web series.
Yeah, and as far as as we're going to wind this down, we were talking about how people have been sleeping on it, Mike, and how maybe some multimedia stuff is starting to get made. Well, they had signed a deal to start making audio dramas, and there's an Archer and Armstrong one out already. It came out in 2016. That was their first, multi-platform deal. So maybe that'll be worth checking out. Maybe you should see if it's on Audible or something.
Yeah.
And then as far as film deals, they did a deal with DMG Entertainment. I think that's one of those. Is it one of the Chinese investment firms or something? Maybe to do some stuff, but that was in 2015. I don't think that panned out. 2018, Sony signed their deal, and then interestingly, Sony has said that they're developing a movie based on the character of Faith. Did you happen to see that character in the?
I don't recall who.
She's the Faith? She's the heavyset girl that can fly.
Oh, Zephyr. Yeah, that I'd like to read, actually, because I like her art look. Actually, I was just looking through the Madefire app, which is one of the comic apps that I use, and to buy her volumes of comics, they're like $13 a piece. For a trade, that's really good.
And their trades, they have slightly more pages than you get in the other ones out there. But anyway, Paramount has the deal for Harbinger, which, they bought it from Sony. So it may be that Sony is passing over the stuff to Paramount. Maybe Paramount is looking for something since they lost that deal with Marvel years ago, right?
Yeah.
You never know. And then there's the web series that JT talked about. But here's the big news. In December of 2019, Valiant announced a partnership with Blowfish Studios to create multi-platform video games based on all the Valiant characters.
I want a side-scrolling beat-em-up like Scott Pilgrim versus the World for Archer and Armstrong.
I would like
Streets of Rage.
Oh yeah, I would like either Eternal Warrior or Ninjak game done by done in the style of like Arkham City or one of the Rocksteady Batman games.
Actually, I just had this thought, JT.
Yeah.
You put Ninjak, because he is a ninja, you do that in the Shadows style. Or not Shadows style, Dark Souls.
You could do
like
it
Sekiro.
You could do it, or you could even go, if you wanted to go retro style, you could do it like Strider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
even a mobile game with Ninjak, that would be awesome.
Bloodshot's basically Gears of War.
It's stuff in the style of the like adventure titles, like the Telltale style. You could do some of their crossovers that way. You could do it pseudo RPG like. There's a lot of things you could do. Bloodshot would be great as a FPS.
Yep, I can see that.
Now, as far as anything else is concerned, it looks like we saw that they've rebooted a lot of the titles and they're coming out, slowly now. I'm not a big fan of what I've seen with the Bloodshot, at least with the cover and some of the first pages. I feel like they peaked with the artwork in the 2012 series. I don't know if JT, if you've thought of anything of the newer ones, if they're holding up. It feels like they did them just because they signed the deal with Sony.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. I was going to say, I don't, not any of the following after the original Archer and Armstrong comics. I really like the 2012 one with just looking at the art by Clayton Henry. It's probably my favorite because was it Barry Windsor Smith and Bob Layton and Jim Shooter all worked on the original Archer and Armstrong, and I just couldn't get I enjoyed those stories. I just couldn't get into the art on that one. And actually, if you want to have some fun read, if you go back to Acclaimed Comics, Valiant Mike, I recommend the Exo Man of War series because it's essentially a nerdy scientist. The Exo Man of War is in this medallion that the Nazis had in World War II, and when it straps onto him, it's like the Guyver.
Okay, weird.
Yeah, they're not afraid to rewrite their books from scratch.
Oh yeah,
it's not like every time where it's the same origin story.
Yeah. No, he's this smart-ass scientist who they get like Captain America to strap the armor on, but the armor takes its cues from its host, but it was still kind of locked into the scientist, like, oh God, I'm going to die. And so the Captain America's, this is going to hurt me. Oh, why am I dead? And then the scientist becomes the new Exo and runs from there.
And interestingly enough, if you go back to the Acclaimed time, they did licensed properties for Killer Instinct, and interestingly enough, the Sliders TV show had a 10 issue comic series. So they did do some interesting things back then, but by far their strongest suit is creating like brand new properties.
Yeah. Now, as we're wrapping it up here, I've got two titles. Like for you, Mike, and for our listeners, I would like to highly recommend. I think it's technically it's the second volume of Ninjak. It's Ninja-K. And it essentially dealing with stuff that's been building in the Ninjak title. It looks at the history of the Ninja program. So apparently MI6 has been running Ninja-based operatives since World War II. So there's like a ninja in the 80s, and he's like this cyborg with like a shoulder-mounted missile launcher. Or there's a female ninja in the 70s who looks all sexy, and she's got like a Pam Grier, afro. Because afros are sneaky. And oh God, what was the other one? It'll come to me in a second. Crap, I can't remember. Alex, take over quick.
Okay, so Michael, is there anything that, as far as what you've seen so far, that you'd like to dive deeper into?
I definitely want to read more Archer and Armstrong because that just hooked me immediately. I'm looking through my Madefire app. I don't see any books for Punk Mambo, whether there was a trade. I really hope so.
She's only had the one miniseries. I think she first showed up in the later part of the original not original, but in like the current run, the first volume of Ninjak, because they have this whole thing called the dead side, which is like the neither world from Beetlejuice, like dead things and other lost things live there. And the other comic I was going to suggest to you, Mike, and our listeners is Ivar Time Walker.
Yeah, that's one we don't have enough good time travel like comics in general that just take it
that aren't Doctor Who.
That aren't like and or everything ends up feeling like Doctor Who. This doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I want to bring up, and I just thought about this as we were mentioning multimedia things, there's a Valiant Universe role-playing game that was put out by Catalyst Game Labs a couple of years ago. I didn't get a chance to play it. I did get sent it for review, but at that time my health wasn't great. I just didn't get a chance to play it and look at it. However, looking at its cast of characters, I just want to read some of the characters that are included in the book if you're so inclined to play. Obviously, you get Bloodshot, you get Archer and Armstrong, you get Cronus, Disciple, Dr. Mirage, Flamingo, Geomancer, Gilead, you get Gunslinger, Harada, High Priest, Little Castle, Livewire, Master Dark, Ninjak, Pulse, Quantum, Shadow Man, Superstar, Time Walker, Torque, Vagabond, Woody, Exo, Man of War, and you get a bunch of NPCs. So if you want to play in the Valiant universe, you can do that. Although I don't see the stats for the GOAT. I'm a little upset.
How did I know you wanted to be the GOAT, Mike? How
I'm going to be the weirdo. But yeah, I mean, it's sad that there wasn't more supplements published for this. As far as I know, it's just a one-off. But that's still pretty cool that they got their own role-playing game for at least one book.
Yeah, and honestly, there's something, as I speaking to Alex off air before we started recording, the whole of Valiant, like these characters, they're 90s AF, but they're 90s AF done right. As he spoke in the beginning, like they're edgy and they're a little more violent, but they're more relatable and more thought out, because like I read the original Harbinger comic that Alex provided, and well, Harada in that came off as just this creepy old man with psychic powers, versus the modern Harada who came off as like this, he wants to fix the world, but he ain't gonna take no shit from anybody while doing it. It's seriously, folks, stop sleeping on this and read it.
Yeah, like check out some of these books. And as I just mentioned, check out the role-playing game. You can find it on Drive-Thru RPG. It's less than like $10. I think it was $9 when I picked it up a few weeks ago. Out of the books, I recommend Archer and Armstrong for sure. I'm interested to check out more of the Harbinger type stuff, and I may check out Faith just because I love the look of the character. So yeah, maybe we'll revisit this topic in a few months' time, see where we all are. But yeah, Alex, what about you?
Honestly, a great place to start is where I sent to you guys the zeros and ones that they've collected, or the Guide to the Valiant Universe. They do one every 3 years or so, and a lot of times that issue is free for Free Comic Book Day, or you can get like the zeros and ones. I've seen them at like my local comic store for like $1 occasionally, though. Like it's an issue where you get like, it's this a little bit bigger than like a standard, I guess, trade, or it's like this, or it's like the size of when you'd have those supersized annuals. So you pay a few bucks, maybe $5 or so, and you could get the introduction issues for every single property they have, which is always a good place to look, because it can be hard and challenging just going randomly and diving into something and not realizing if you're going to like it or not. And I wish that more companies would do that. I would say Image is the only other one that does decent things with their, Image First, they call them, where they make them like $1, but then they usually like strip out the color and make it black and white or something stupid. This is a good jumping on point for somebody who's new to the franchise.
So that's going to do it for this edition of TWIG Sunday Funnies. We definitely thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you are enjoying the summer content we are putting out here on This Week in Geek. You've probably heard us do Loose Cannon. Hopefully by the time this comes out, me and Alex should be coming back from our summer vacation fairly soon. There should be some Nerd to the Third Powers coming out during this time. On our next edition of TWIG Sunday Funnies, you can look forward to in August, we will be taking a look at our favorite super team-ups. And that could be anything from the X-Men, the Avengers, the Justice League, or anything else. Any universe is open to us. So we will be talking about these a little bit more in depth next month. So if you want to get in touch with the show, you can find us at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. If you wish to email us into the show, you can also check our Twitter, which is maintained primarily by Alex, at ThisWeekInGeek. JT, if people wanted to find you, where would they look?
You can hear me every so often on the podcast Comic Connoisseurs with my co-host Ben and Red Ink. And if you want to get a hold of me on the social medias, just look up JT from Saskatoon, Twitter, Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I don't make it. I'm just addicted to watching that stuff.
Y'all fucked up. So anyway, for TWIG Sunday Funnies, we have been
JT from Saskatoon,
Alex the producer.
I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd, saying be excellent to each other. We'll catch you guys again next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at ThisWeekInGeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekInGeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.